So our first subtitle for today is Vicksburg Falls. So we talked about Vicksburg just briefly yesterday when we were talking about the Battle of Gettysburg. Remember that Vicksburg falls on July 4th. The Battle of Gettysburg occurs between July 1st and 3rd. And so this is a very busy 4 days for the Union Army and a very important 4 days for the Union Army. But this is happening right around the same time as the Battle of Gettysburg. So Vicksburg, which is located in Mississippi, was a strategically important town for control of the Mississippi River. Uh, this is for several reasons. One, there is a crossing of the river located near Vicksburg that the Confederate Army used frequently to move food supplies across the Mississippi from Louisiana and Texas in particular, which produced a lot of the Confederate food supplies. But also, it was just important for the control of the Mississippi River and who was able to control traffic on the Mississippi River. So Grant knows that this is important and he moves his forces towards Vicksburg. And he tries to take it by force initially. He actually makes, I think, 3 attempts to take over Vicksburg. But he suffers very heavy casualties. Vicksburg is a little bit kind of swampy and it's very difficult. And so he ends up very reluctantly settling in to besiege Vicksburg rather than try to take it by force and lose even more of his troops. Now, the Confederate Army inside Vicksburg hoped for reinforcements. Now, they were led by Commander Pemberton, and he pinned all of his hopes on being reinforced by General Johnston, who was kind of the main Confederate general out in the West at this time. However, as we shall see, that's not going to happen. Now, Grant actually gives Pemberton the opportunity to surrender and spare his troops, but he refuses. And so both sides settle in for a long siege. Now, the siege begins in May and does not end until July of 1863, and it lasts for a total of 47 days. And so inside the town of Vicksburg, men were starving, both soldiers and the civilians that were already in the town and got kind of trapped in there when the Union Army surrounded the town. And by this point, mutiny was in the air, and the soldiers are starting to consider overthrowing their commander just so they could get out of the situation. And Pemberton knows that he cannot withstand Grant's next assault. And so on July 4th, he proposes negotiations with the Union Army. And as is characteristic for him, Grant demands total surrender from Pemberton and the Confederate Army. Now, he doesn't really have any other option here. Pemberton is out of food, his army is very close to mutiny, and he has no hope of reinforcements. And so he does surrender completely to Grant. Now, Grant lets the soldiers depart pretty generously, actually, but he does reject their attempt to take their slaves with them as personal property. So Vicksburg does fall. Now, this is very important. Remember that Lee was hoping that his northern invasion in the Battle of Gettysburg would lure Grant away from Vicksburg. Instead, in the span of 4 days, Lee loses Gettysburg and Grant takes Vicksburg. Actually, those two battles end in the span of just 2 days. The blockade of the South is still in place, so things are not looking great for the Confederacy at this time. So this battle is important for a few reasons. One, the Union takes control of the Mississippi River, which, if we'll remember, was part of the Anaconda Plan that they came up with early on in the war. So this is now, if we're counting, 2/3 of the Anaconda Plan that's complete. All that remains is to take over Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy. Also, taking control of the Mississippi River disrupts the food supply heading to the Confederate Army and splits the Confederacy in half. So again, things are not looking good for the Confederacy, particularly in the West, but now also in the East with the loss of the Battle of Gettysburg.